I think I'm gonna start with a small story. I was a manager for a band in Denmark. The band was called Few Wolves. I have these two young guys. They produced music for a long time, and finally I set them up with they were, in this case it was Sony Music in Denmark, who signed us for a deal, which was great until we started releasing music and we found out that nothing happened. I didn't understand that because I knew it was amazing music, obviously. So I started trying to see if there was other possibilities of getting any data, because from Sony we basically did not receive any valuable information. But that was also because it was very local. So what I found out was actually that we were in like heavy A rotation on a pretty significant radio station in Poland. So I walked up to my major label A&R as I had invented the wheel, and he did not care about this. So I did not understand that to begin with, but basically he was only interested in what happens in Denmark. So for him to do something in Poland, he would have to contact the Polish societies or the Polish Sony Music, and he probably did not even know them. So this was kind of the Kickstarter for me to build this company called WARM, short for World Airplay Radio Monitor. And basically WARM is a platform where everyone can track and identify radio airplays anywhere in the world. And they can do it in real time. The global music industry is actually losing out on incredibly important information needed for them to identify new and emerging markets. And as you said, could be for touring purposes, it could be PR marketing, and obviously also as an evidence to your local performance rights organization, which I will refer to as a PRO onwards. So we have solved this actually by using audio fingerprint recognition and AI. This is a technology we have licensed from a German company called BAC Technology, and the technology in particular is called Music DNA. So for the ones who are not really familiar with this technology as much as with blockchain, this technology is very similar to the app called Shazam. So basically what we do is we listen to a broadcast and we match that against the actual audio file or the fingerprint of the file. Meaning that we can detect airplays everywhere and in real time as long as it's a public broadcast. We could potentially apply the same technology for other companies. It could be streaming services, etc. But obviously the hurdles here are to gain access to the actual platforms. So what does WARM do different than all the other services? So first and foremost, these services, which some of you might know, is all the music industry standards. They have divided the world between them. So for example, Mediabase and Nielsen is very much a UK service or data deliverable, where Music Trace, for example, is in the GSA region, and Radio Monitor is a European data deliverable. So if you combine all these, they only reach around approximately 12,000 radio stations. It's a little difficult to say because there can be duplets and not all of them are very transparent in terms of the volume of radio stations. But on the other hand, they focus primarily on large terrestrial radio stations instead of necessarily all types of stations. That could be college radios and genre and niche-specific radios. Also, they are extremely expensive and they are basically only available as B2B services. Or B2B business model, sorry. Another problem here is that they all have, or most of them have individual agreements with the music organization IFPI. And so IFPI then creates charts and deliver information to the indie sector in particular, or in most countries, which means that as long as this data is local, for example, as a Danish example, the IFPI in Denmark sells a subscription to a indie label in Denmark, then they can access information on Scandinavia radio stations and UK radio stations, but only the large commercial terrestrial ones, which means obviously a lot of people lose out on a lot of information. And the point with Warm is that we are opposite on all these subjects, meaning you can access the information as an artist, you can pay per song. It is the same price point for everyone, so a major label would have to pay the same per song as an artist, for example. So, as mentioned, Warm is a service that is useful for everyone. And right now we are focusing heavily on radio promoters and managers, because we've seen these are the key persons that creates a dribble-down effect on the rest of the industry, meaning obviously the record labels and the publishers, and in the end, obviously also the artists and songwriters themselves. But what we also see is that most of our users actually comes from a very differentiated sectors of the music industry already. Our users are spread across the globe. We have users primarily from North America and Europe, which is also where we are focusing our target group, or our target. But in general, we have users from almost 100 countries already. It's important to understand that on a global scale, based on my knowledge, radio is the biggest media for music consumption still. And that's obviously because there's lots of cultural factors. In the US, a lot of people listening to radio while they drive big distances. It's similar in Australia. And in many countries, radio is just the preferred type of media. Obviously, in Europe and in the US, we'll see that the new generation of people uses streaming services over radio. But what we haven't talked about is streaming services. Right now, Spotify releases 40,000 new songs every day. And 6 months ago, that number was only 20,000. So we are reaching an exponential growth of new releases on streaming services that are globally available. But at the same time, radio airplays, we only monitor very locally. So it is something that does not add up. If we're looking at the differences between radio and streaming, obviously on streaming the average rate is usually very low, whereas on radio it can be very high, but it can also be very difficult to actually have the evidence that supports your claims. On streaming, on the other hand, we have there's usually only one listener, whereas on radio there's not a lot of radio stations that only have one listener. People don't want to do radio then. And obviously streaming is very driven by algorithm, skip rates, playlist, which is usually which is updated all the time. But on radio, on the other hand, most radios, not necessarily large radios, but most radios works from a human standpoint and is obviously therefore organically driven. Which in the end means it's easier to connect with radio stations and it's harder to connect with playlist curators. So in Warm we have already achieved some great stuff. We have only been in the air for 2 years. We have been participating in 2 acceleration programs, Startup Sesame and Accelerate in Denmark. We also won the Slush Music Startup Competition Prize in 2017 when they tried with a music program. We have received a grant of 65,000 euro from a Danish innovation fund called InnoBooster, where we are actually trying to build a royalty calculator. And then finally, we have obviously also received a grant from the European Commission to build a new set of data charts or airplay charts that can allow people to see what is happening in more niche-specific genres. So that could be, for example, a European rock chart. It could be a European student radio chart, etc. Instead of now where we have country-based top 40 or top 30 lists, which obviously is full of Justin Bieber, Ed Sheeran, etc. So hopefully this will create a much more valuable set of charts for the majority of the industry. That's about it. Thank you so much, guys.